sure I describe myself as an accelerationist. So yes, I'm a bit more subdued compared to you guys.
Well,
I actually had to ask AI to try and give me a term that would make sense for like a cautious accelerationist, there was also, it gave me a whole bunch of bullshit that I'd never heard of before. So it's not a well established term. There's doomers and accelerationists. Everyone talks about those two. No one talks about like
sort of way,
people who are trying to think intelligently about it.
I can see positives in developing technology. You know, that's just a vague, generic statement. It's just there's too many
People benefit
too
from
much
technology.
Of a mixed blessing, I guess. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a dark side of technology, but the question is, as we have been discussing.
Right.
And you can be in safety and still be an accelerationist.
Yeah. Well, I love that. That's good.
You can.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
I'm telling your boss. He's an accelerationist.
Accelerationist.
I know you're an acceleration.
I would never have guessed, mate.
I guessed that as soon as you said we shouldn't stop.
Although you did say massive, what was it?
Yeah.
Massive economic upheaval next year or something, or 2 years time.
2027.
Sorry, September 30th, 2027. I'm not going to forget that. On September 2029th, I'm going to my bunker.
I'm going short September, or actually 1st of October.
You're going to short.
Stock exchange going short on everything.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
So now we have John. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
So what is your idea of the future?
Okay, well, my idea of the future is mostly, I have to say, quite negative, with a bit of a qualifier that, you know, if at some way level we see it coming, we can avoid it. But let's say, you know, I was talking earlier about, you know, the various looming issues that are building up, be it, you know, global warming, you know, medicines becoming less effective or antibiotics becoming less effective. But also what I'm talking about, the overhead of running our world is sort of getting worse. You know, I was saying, look, we need to pump our water further. And like at least in Sydney where we are, look, you know, given enough time, we're going to hit another drought. And people might recall that last drought, I don't know, what was it, 10 or 15 years ago?
Yeah,
the way
it's
we're
pretty
all
bad.
wringing our hands and watching those daily updates on Warragamba Dam. And then I think they built that desalination plant. I think Bob Carr said, you know, desalinated water is like bottled electricity, right? So, you know, all these things happen, and as these overheads accumulate, you need to consume more and more energy. It's sort of like the case of running just to stand still. And I know, I think Jared Tainter talking about the collapse of complex civilizations. He talks about the complexity crisis, the thing that undid Rome. So I know there's ideas that technology will be a blessing, we'll reach a post-capitalist world, but I can only say maybe that will happen. But until that transformation happens, you know, we'll have some very rough times in the meantime. And I guess I was also talking about human sovereignty. And, you know, we do have government surveillance and, you know, under guise of, you know, making us safer, you know, there's all these cameras being set up on the beach and in the parks and so on. And you also have our various security departments, because they have a corporate memory that outlasts any one government or any one minister. So they can, over the decades, say, we want to surveil Australians more, and that has actually been happening. And I think a lot of the laws we have are quite draconian. And I can only say that, you know, maybe I'm being a bit neurotic and conspiratorial, but when you have laws that sort of say if the government clamps down on you and silences you, you can't tell anyone else about it, you know, that's going to make you quite neurotic. And another thing the government is doing, it's undermining, I guess, communication because of the actual non-disclosure agreements that government is doing with bodies outside of government to silence them. So we have a great many things that are causing issues. And I guess I also mentioned, surveillance capitalism. And, you know, the fact that we have the social media that is, you know, basically in a feedback loop to sort of cause a psychological damage in order to maximise profits. Now, on the one hand, I think I was trying to say before, the internet can be a force of good, can be a force to connect us together. And, one of the promises that was sort of validated is if, you have an interest in, I guess, some obscure hobby, you can meet up with someone on Norway over the internet and, discuss this particular hobby or whatever. And that was one of the promises of the internet that was realised. But I think the internet had an original promise of communicating information, and it has basically been subverted by the corporate ethic of basically manipulating us with dark patterns on the websites. So, and also, you have the thing of, goodness me, it was Cambridge Analytica manipulating election results and the Brexit results, and things being done in hiding, because you can have obnoxious advertisements in the newspapers, but at least they're on record. But what happened with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook were there was targeted ads displayed to particular people, and it's only as a result of government inquiries with serious powers who actually found out that this actually happened. If that didn't happen, that would have been totally hidden. And I suppose there is a thing, I think there's some maxim that if Facebook has 400 likes of yours, then it can predict your behaviour better than you can.
Yeah, it knows you're pregnant before you do.
Yes,
well.
yes. I remember that. I think that would have been Target or Kmart or something that monitored people's changes in their purchasing habits and sort of figured out that they were pregnant. And then the way that it sends targeted catalogues to people and this sort of thing. And these sorts of things are changing what it means to be a human being. It's sort of like we are not making our own choices. We are the puppeteers. We are the puppets rather, and the puppeteers are somewhere over there. And, it's undermining what it means to be a human being. And look, maybe, I think I said it earlier, maybe we are a bundle of conflicting drives all packed into the one brain, and we delude ourselves into thinking that we're actually a single unified consciousness. And I think there's theories in Buddhism that do actually say that the notion that we have an I is an illusion. It's a paradoxical thing. You say we're here, but we're here, and we delude ourselves into thinking we self-exist. Well, never mind. That's a bit too much of a sort of a rabbit hole to go down. But the point is, even if our brains are so fragile, our sense of identity, our nature of identity is so precarious, let's not have corporations take control of it, for other agendas. So these are all the bad things I see happening. And I suppose in a sense it's not just Philip K. Dick, but it's some of the worst dystopian sentiments from Philip K. Dick. Because if there was one author that foresaw the nature of advertising, that we now have markets in behavioural futures, the one author that saw that sort of thing coming, I think, was Philip K. Dick. So I'm talking about all these bad things that can happen. And I think we're also talking earlier, I think it was Myanmar that they actually used, was it Facebook or at least some form of social media to figure out, how to commit genocide against, racial groups that they didn't like. So that's how things can be abused at another level. So there's a lot of bad things that can happen. It's not to do with artificial intelligence becoming conscious or whatever. You can say that your algorithms to manipulate to obtain greater profit can become a lot more powerful as a result of AIs. And in a sense, if the AI sits there and it talks to you in a non-manipulative way and just chats away amiably without an agenda well, in a sense, who cares? But the problem is manipulative agendas, dark patterns, if they are facilitated by AI. That's your big problem there.
Can I ask a quick question where you're at there?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So with, let's say, large language models like Grok, which is slightly right-leaning, or ChatGPT or Anthropic, which is slightly left-leaning. By the way, I think they're slowly converging more towards the middle, which I think is nice. But would you say that is already a manipulation? Like if I let's say I have no political leanings and I talk a lot to ChatGPT, I'm probably going to end up leaning a little left because all of its feedback it gives me, all its answers it gives me, everything makes the left sound better. And if I spend most of my time talking to Grok, I'm probably going to end up leaning right. Is that kind of a baby version of what you're talking about?
I think one of the things is, I suppose I haven't banged on about it so far in what I've said, but I do believe in information, informed consent, and those sorts of things. And if ChatGPT or Grok or whatever says, "Look, I'm looking at the world from a certain point of view," and is upfront and open about that, that's one thing that dilutes the badness of what we're talking about here. And I suppose, in a sense, I would also say if I take a few steps backwards to the public square, someone has a political point of view and they're advocated in the public square. Everyone knows that they're saying that. Everyone knows what's been said, and it's an individual, a human being trying to say that X, Y, Z is the case. We are going to try to persuade each other of stuff, and I think that's a natural human thing. And I suppose philosophically you can go into this naturalistic fallacy, and I think we were talking about how cyanide is natural, but anyway, the point is, at some point, human beings trying to persuade each other that they are true is, I guess, part of the human experience. What becomes a problem is when this sort of process is automated in vicious feedback loops with vicious algorithms behind it, and you have lost
With
the
misaligned
genuine human
objectives.
element of people going out in the public square and say, "I think this is why I think it." Now, I would also say that part of this whole thing, what you might call the emotional manipulation, in a sense, take away AI and, I guess, in a sense, very elaborate marketing schemes. Before we had AI, before we had computers, I think you can say even 30 years ago, obnoxious advertising marketing schemes that tried to take advantage of your psychological weaknesses. That was a problem 30 years ago. With AI, it's reached a whole new different level, or I should say with surveillance capitalism, markets in behavioural futures, it's reached a whole different level where it becomes very pernicious. So I am sort of saying a certain amount of persuasion is part of the human experience, but beyond some point, the wheels fall off the cart and it does become something different. And this is one of the things. Some things you have to say, look, this is a continuum. At this level, it's benign, it's part of the human experience. It gets worse and worse and worse, and somewhere you cross the threshold and it becomes something evil. Now, I can't tell you exactly where that threshold is, but I can say you go far enough along that incline and you end up in an evil place.
There's a strong argument we're already there with just the Facebook algorithm, right? With just, or your YouTube algorithm or anything which just feeds you the next thing which is slightly more radicalized and takes you down the path of
there's also
polarization.
Adam Curtis, who's a UK documentary maker. And even before we had all these algorithms, he said the modern world, like sequels in movies, right? He was noticing a trend. If you like that, you'll like this, right? And that was a trend before Facebook started to play silly buggers with that. And he was talking about sequels of movies and that sort of thing, and how so much of our world is, if you like that, you'll like this. And in a sense, if you're a lazy marketer, that's a way to, I think, past behaviour is a predictor of the future sort of thing. And it's a lazy way of relating to things, but it also is limiting what is creative and is rattling around in the world. But anyway, so I've gone through all these negative things, and I have actually said, look, I suppose I want to avoid, I guess, banging on politically and sound like I'm on a tree stump sort of banging on about this. But I do have to say, if these things are recognised, this doesn't have to happen. If enough people recognise these bad trends and push against them, maybe they won't get as bad as I am predicting. That is, I guess, the way out if we go down that path.
Power of the people.
So, but that is my prediction of the future. Now, as far as AI goes more directly, I know of economists in the US who are saying that only 5% of jobs can really be affected by artificial intelligence because they're more office jobs. And I think, there is a thing of like hand car washers. Do we want to really make robots make hand car washers? And then the thing is, how much does it cost to pay a person to do a hand car wash on a car as compared to the capital investment in a robot to do the same thing? And I'm scratching my head on that. But, obviously, if these costs drop down low enough, you can say it's cheaper to get a robot to do these things than a human to do these things. And I guess that's its own sort of rabbit hole of economics and what the economic future will actually hold. And I mean, it's an issue, but I think I've covered enough ground.
If you can believe the head of Figma, he believes that you can get these robots down to $300 a month.
Yeah, wasn't it Unitree that said 16 grand for their basic model?
30, he's already around $33,000, right?
Or even the Optimus from Tesla is saying that eventually it's going to be pretty cheap.
His economic model says if you can get it down to $300 a month, which is the average cost that people would normally spend on a car,
Yep.
everyone would buy one.
Mm.
Well, the
I
other
would.
thing, and look, here I'm going back to, I guess, what was the Matrix movie.
Yeah.
Now, here we have a robot that does the job of a human. But didn't we say earlier we're going to have trouble getting all the electricity to make these robots run? And, in a perverse sort of way, I haven't done the calculations, but I wonder if it's going to actually be cheaper to feed a human being to move their muscles and clean a car than it is to find the electricity to run one of these robots to do the same job. And that shades of the Matrix was all these people generating heat in order to run the grand machine. Because, the other problem in the background is indeed global warming. And I think we also spoke about Jevons paradox. And one of the things about our current world is, even though we get better at producing energy and more efficient and so on, we always seem to be using more energy this year than we did last year.
Yeah.
Because even though we might get better at using that energy,
We're never
our
going to run out of
economic
ways to do
growth
it.
Yeah, we
more
want-
than
we want more.
compensates for that.
Yeah.
So we are facing a climatic crisis. And, the idea that we'll do all these robots. But, I mean, there are, assessments of, this is more done in the US, but over the decades how the American householders use more and more electrical energy per year as they've had more and more appliances. And it has been a thing that has been noticeable. And now you've got the immense amount of energy required for server farms and things doing crypto and so on. So we are reaching some barriers there.
Yeah, but it's also about the cost, the fact that you don't have to get people to go to and from their office environment because the robots will already be there. You don't have to pay for transport costs.
And you've got dark factories where you don't have to light the factory because the robots can work in the dark.
Yes.
Right, so there's mitigating factors.
So there's efficiencies to be gained here and there, and possibly in
But
major ways.
we are like in your defense, we are extremely efficient at using the minimum amount of energy. Like I can't remember what the numbers are, but our brains are incredibly efficient to get the level of intelligence that we have from like a burger a day or less.
That's true.
I think I'm not the only person to make this observation, but I think people say, while we can get ridiculously powered in terms of CPU grunt sort of thing of these things, in terms of the amount of watts you put into the human brain to get it to do what it does.
Yeah.
Our brains are ridiculously efficient compared to a decent server rack that it may well have a lot of MIPS or whatever, but shit, it uses several kilowatts or something. So.
But our brain is shackled with a lot of very bad, well, good software, but it's
limited.
for the wrong for the wrong thing. Like you have to really push your brain to remember things, whereas for an AI, it's just one pass.
Yes. Okay.
So,
That's true. Yeah, it's different intelligence. Isn't it? I mean,
so it's like our brain was created to, don't remember stuff unless you really, really, that rock over there with that tree, if you've passed it 20 times, okay, remember it. Otherwise, forget it. And we have to do that with everything. I have to remember a formula for a test. I have to sit there and recall it over and over and over. It's such a waste.
Not everyone, right? So you have people with eidetic memories, but then you have other cognitive issues associated with that. So
Yeah,
I think we've got that optimal piece. The modern human, the average human, there's an optimization. There are outliers. Clearly, there are outliers. You know, we've got the movie Rain Man is a perfect example.
I'm just
right?
talking about the majority.
Yep,
case.
yep. No, that's what. But what I'm saying is, so the AI, super intelligence. I'm thinking along the lines of Rayman. They have an ability that we do not have,
Yes.
but there's an impairment that we haven't found yet.
So if we could reprogram our brains to be more susceptible to what we need them to be, so more susceptible to remembering stuff, regurgitating stuff.
I just want to be able to do RAG. I just want my brain to be able to do RAG, and which I can kind of do if I pull out my phone, right, at any time. Hey Siri, you know, what's the square root of 75, whatever.
But that's an extra step.
It is an extra step. I need my brain machine interface so I can do RAG on the spot. And then, you know, we're all sitting here going, what was the quote again? We'd never say that. That would be a phrase that would be like, hey, remember 50 years ago when we used to say, hey, what was the... Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's part of that transhumanism thing, you know, with BCI, and actually Brendan would probably talk about it. So we would augment... I think it was Ray Kurzweil also said, in order for us to keep up, we need to augment ourselves in order to stay in touch with what's going on, because it'll be
So that we're not useless subclass of people.
Yes.
Maybe we just keep up with AI in our brains.
Well,
but then what is that? What are we still human at that point?
Transhuman.
Well,
I'm wearing glasses, so I have.
There you go.
Yes,
adjunct.
Benjamin.
Yeah.
That's
you lose a finger, you're still human.
Yeah.
You augment your arm with, so you lose an arm, but you get a prosthetic limb. You're still human.
Right.
and we're wearing
So-
shoes. Yes.
I'm just saying, like we're augmenting ourselves.
That's the Theseus's ship thing.
Yes.
And also, when we augment ourselves, the robustness of that part of ourselves diminishes. So it's like, you know, we have shoes. If you take off the shoes, our feet are so smooth and sensitive. You know.
Yeah, God forbid you walk out on the hot
Yeah,
bitumen
you
on
can't
a
even
summer's
walk on
day in
grass.
Sydney.
Yeah.
Barefoot.
But would you go back to no shoes?
No.
Yeah. And like I use a GPS to get everywhere,
Yes.
right? And my sense of direction has diminished a lot. I have
Yes.
no sense of direction, but I never get lost. So do I care?
That's right, and you have people. You know, you see those video reels from people from the 1900s or late 1800s, and you hear them speak. They speak so eloquently, like it makes me feel like a
Plebiscite.
Cognitively deficient.
a blabbering monkey. You know, they speak so eloquently because they had to. There was no, you know, instant autocorrect thesaurus. They had to do that. They had to play the piano beautifully. They had to dance beautifully. They had to recall facts and figures. They had to do all of that.
I think that was the elite who people actually wanted to film.
Well, actually, that's true.
So the chimney sweep.
That's true.
But no, this cognitive offloading though, I think is amazing, because the fact that I have no sense of direction means that that part of my brain, it's not just rotting, it's used for something else, right? Like I don't do arithmetic because I have a calculator for that, but I'm able to discuss with you guys where the future of humanity might be going because I filled my brain with all that information instead.
Well,
Right.
I would sort of throw something in that I suppose, who knows, I'm in the pirate party. I tend to be, I guess, neurotic about my privacy. Please don't understand, I'm quite friendly as well. But,
Is your name even really John?
Yeah, but let me tell you, talking about GPS, I remember I was wandering around Katoomba, and I very rarely have my GPS on, but this time we were a little bit lost, and I did actually chuck on the GPS and then figured out the way up the hill, and oh yeah, we're here, and there's that road, and so on. And eventually we ended up walking into Katoomba and went to the Carrington Hotel, which is a lovely hotel. And anyway, we had either a beer or a coffee there or whatever, and came out. And then, you know, prompting on my mobile phone, he's saying, "Oh, so how was the Carrington Hotel? Would you like to rate it?" I'm thinking, no, fuck off. Right? And I don't know if my reaction is unique, but notice I've talked a lot about the very manipulative aspect to the world that is growing up, and that was a particular thing that really bloody annoyed me. And I have to say, a lot of the internet really bloody annoys me. So that's. But
I have the opposite to some extent. I 100% agree with the risks of it, and if you look at the sci-fi showings of that, like Minority Report, where there's all the advertising that goes to him as he's walking down the street, and it's horrific. It's so like intrusive and personal, and because there's no privacy. But for certain like walled gardens where I trust it, like I probably shouldn't trust OpenAI and I probably shouldn't trust Apple, but I've just made a decision in my life that for those two companies, I'm going to be completely transparent and I'm going to have zero privacy with them. I'm going to give them everything. You want to share your location? Yes. You want to let this app know what you're doing while you're on other apps? Yes. Like I have lent into that. And because of that, all of the stuff that is like my ChatGPT is amazing because I've filled my custom instructions with all of my personal information. So whenever I talk to it, it instantly knows my context, it knows the company I work for, what I'm trying to achieve, what my goals are in life, it knows my family, it knows how I relate to them and what they like doing and everything. So it's so much more useful to me than vanilla ChatGPT.
Well, I have to say, you have made that choice actively, and good luck to you. And I mean, within the Pirate Party, I endorse personal sovereignty and personal choice. But the important thing is there's been consent and you have chosen. Now, what is the other cliche about so many apps, so many mobile phones? The default settings are by default intrusive and manipulative.
Yes, that's
and you do not
Mission
have
by
that
default.
choice. Now, in your case, let's say you are aware enough to have made this choice consensually and with your own free will. And good luck to you. You've made that choice. But notice just how our world is engineered. The default settings are manipulative and all those sorts of things. And you would stumble in and wouldn't actually know what your mobile phone is about to get up to, because it's a complicated thing and you're just one person. And I suppose extending the model of this asymmetry, we wander into a supermarket and stumble around and think, oh, I might buy this, oh, I might buy that. But at the other end of the table are like desks full of shrinks trying to figure out how to better separate us from our money. And look at that disparity in power and understanding of the human brain and your own motivations.
Yeah.
So, as I say, you've made a choice, and that's lovely because someone's actually making a choice.
Well, you think that a personalized AI would help level that score? So the choices in the supermarket, the default settings on these apps, if your AI knew your preferences and your proclivity to say yes or no to things, and then maybe it'll ask you, say, look, this thing's doing something. Do you want me to turn it off? Or I've turned it off unless you want me to turn it on.
Well, I think you've set up a world which is so complicated that you need the help of the AI.
Yeah.
To me, that's sad that the world is that complicated that you need that sort of help. And for me, you've already lost the battle if that's the situation you're in.
Why would you have lost the battle? I mean, that to me sounds like the beginning of the clawing back of your own sovereignty.
Well, I would say the problem is that these default settings are manipulative in the first place.
Oh yeah.
That's the problem. Not in a sense. You're fixing a problem, but it would be better if the problem weren't there in the first place.
Yes,
but the first principles will say you're going back to greed here. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to those, even down to like newsletters. When I would make newsletters for people, do you want the ticked box on subscribe to newsletter? Yes, make it ticked by default. I mean, it happens. It's been happening for a while, this sort of thing, and I mean, it's just gone into overdrive. But
Yeah, and what drives that? Like,
But one of those cool things would be
capitalistic greed.
If you had your own personal AI, it's like, oh, you're just being caught in a data breach. Okay, show me where my data's being used and show me how I can fix everything up, and the AI can go out and search for you.
Well, that's funny that you talk about that. So I'm part of a university where we've had 3 data breaches in the last year, and we're constantly being attacked, and we put out, because I'm in safety, right? So we put out all this communication to, this is how you've been affected by the breach. This is call this number and they'll tell you how to fix, how. We can't tell them too much information, obviously, because it's under investigation. But essentially, we're giving them services, and these are the counsellors they're on standby right now. I'll listen to you and take you through the emotional trauma. This is the number that will show you how to secure your personal identification information. This is you know how many people called?
No one.
How many?
0. 0 called for counselling. I think it was 11 that called for to find out how their information is better secured. So there's specific contractors that, and then from a please tell me more about my data that you have. Right, that's a legal right in Australia. It was a few, but not many. Right, I'm not going to release the numbers, but let's say less than 20.
Wow.
And we're talking about thousands that were affected and thousands that were communicated to.
Well, I mean, that just goes to show you that people just don't care.
Or they don't understand. That's also possible.
Well, that's true, or both.
Well, I was, let's say, look, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. We think we do need to bring this to a close. There was the Optus data breach. And for me, look, in some fundamental sense, look, we all make mistakes. And I suppose you should be a certain degree of forgiveness to them. But the thing that really pissed me off about Optus was they did go to a government inquiry talking about, we think maybe we need to regulate this better and ensure data privacy and data security. And Optus was saying, no, we got it under control. It's fine. And for me, the fact that they went to that inquiry with that sort of attitude is an aggravating factor.
Yeah.
In other words, they're more guilty than they would have been. If they were humble going into that inquiry and then they were humble when they were breached, cool. That wasn't the case.
No.
Anyway, that's me giving Optus a free kick. Anyway, I couldn't. Yeah.
Humility. There's a lot.
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up, but thank you, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, my
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
agree. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good morning and a good night. I like it. How long have we been here?
Been here.
I know.